Spatial disorientation killed everyone on the Kobe Bryant helicopter tragedy. But what is spatial disorientation? Let's find out in the hangar. Welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Dan Milliken.
And I'm Christy Wong. Today's episode brought to you by Gold Seal and iFly GPS.
Well, Christy, spatial disorientation has been in the news a ton.
A lot.
And we have our special guest today, a In the Hangar favorite. We have Joe Casey. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you all for letting me be here. It's great.
All right, spatial disorientation. What is this?
Well, spatial disorientation is where you're disoriented for your position and relative to the center of the earth. We do it. You know where your position is every day as you walk around. You keep yourself upright or sit upright in your chair. You're not falling over, so you're keeping your orientation. When you go flying, that's more difficult, and therefore can be dangerous.
Right, because humans weren't evolved to do kind of what we do. We're up in the air doing this.
Your body was designed to be on the ground.
Exactly.
And it works really wonderfully on the ground most of the time. There are some people that have vertigo problems and things of this nature, but your body works really, really, really well on the ground. But the minute we go into the air, now we have different forces acting upon your body, and your body can lie to you. And when it does, and you listen to those lies, you end up with a position where you end up in a place where you can put the airplane in a compromising position.
Like the Kobe Bryant tragedy.
Easily. The Kobe Bryant tragedy is a perfect example of inadvertent IMC, somebody that was planning to be VMC or visual meteorological conditions, going instrument meteorological conditions, not ready for it, near the ground, and look at the result.
Yeah, last summer, actually, Dan and I had an opportunity to talk to the Pateys, and Suzy, who is Mark's wife, actually had a really interesting story about how she got into spatial disorientation. In fact, I think we've got a clip of that.
Well, I was convinced that the instruments were turning to the right, and I was literally in a roll to the right, fighting myself to put it straight and level, and Mark kept saying, "You're diving, you're going down." You know, like push it to the left.
On the radio.
Yeah, on the radio. He's in the plane behind me, and he could see my lights going down to the right. And he's like, "You got to push it to the left. You got to push it to the left." I'm like, "I am," but my brain's fighting myself, and I nearly took us down, me and 3 kids, down to the ground. And he just kept saying, "Push your throttle, full throttle." Full mixture, let's just get the plane happy, and that there was nothing wrong with the plane, but just so that if there was anything, that we had our bases covered. And he just like, just climb, just get a positive rate of climb and go on this heading. And after about 5 minutes, we could start to see the horizon of the lights of St. George, Utah, which is southern Utah, and they just came into view, and it's like, okay, I got this. And
wow,
when there is no horizon, it's difficult.
Wow,
So
that's incredible.
After we landed back at home, we actually landed in Cedar City, which is just beyond, just so that I could relax and calm down because we had lights underneath. But when we landed back in Spanish Fork, we got the GPS and was looking at my tracks, and I had done 3 or 4 complete circles, not knowing it. And descending at the same time. So it was one of those close calls that I hope nobody ever has to experience.
So what do you think, Joe, watching Suzy's story?
Well, I appreciate her telling the story. It's a perfect example of what we call the Leans. The Leans is what that's called. And the Leans is a somatogyral illusion. It's kind of a fancy word for basically, you think of the word gyral, somatogyral illusion. You have basically organs in your body called the semicircular canals, which detect angular movement, things that turn. They can pitch, roll, and yaw.
So we have built-in gyros.
You got two of them actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Good
one
tell.
on either side of the head, near the ears, and so you kind of need to know what that is. But you have the semicircular canals, and they have basically a way of detecting this angular movement. And I raided my wife's kitchen and came up with a way to show this that I think works out fairly well. Can I show how that?
Yeah. And you talked about, so show us what you have here.
Well, think of it this way. When your head moves, when it tilts forward, back, or yaws, your body senses that movement in the semicircular canals, sends a signal to your brain, which interprets that movement and helps you keep your equilibrium, helps you determine where you're at in the world. So if you lean your head forward, lean your head back, anything that's considering angular movement, well, the semicircular canals are involved. And the way it works is you have a fluid that's in your ear area near the semicircular canals. And there's basically a thing called a cupula that will be deflected whenever fluid moves. So that's all there is to it. How do we deflect? We move our head and it senses that movement. It works kind of like this. So if you look at this, and again, I raided my wife's kitchen. I have a Lazy Susan with a circular cake pan, and I taped on basically what I'm calling a cupola, which is what we have in our semicircular canals. And I put in here a cooking oil is all it is. And basically what we're looking at, if you look at this, the cupola that's here, if the cupola gets deflected by movement, so I can move the Lazy Susan, you can see how the cupola gets deflected because the fluid remains still while everything else moves around it. So if that were to move, so you can turn your head to the left or the right, it'd be the same as if I turn my head left or right, and the cupola gets deflected, your brain interprets that movement. Works fine. So this is how the semicircular canals work, and there's a semicircular canal for the pitch, roll, and yaw on both sides. Very incredibly impressive system.
So it's really normal for people to experience the leans, right, during flight?
Sure. Let's talk about how the leans develop. It basically is where you're flying your airplane and you lean over where the airplane is now banked and you're swearing up and down that you're straight and level. And so when you're in a turn, and this is what Suzy had in her flight, was almost assuredly is where she had banked the airplane accidentally, not noticing that movement, and then goes, oh my goodness, I'm not straight and level, and moves it back over. But her body detected that movement and said, no, you need to go back to what her body is telling her is straight and level. Because if you listen to her videos, she had very little visual cues. It was at nighttime. So there's very little outside. There's very few lights to be able to tell her what's up, what's down. You didn't have all of the ability to see everything. And so her body basically lied to her. If you think about it, I can give you a good illustration here. Whenever the cupola gets moved, it sends a signal to your brain. So what can end up happening is if you have a very slow movement, just where the cupola doesn't detect it, very slow movement where you're in a bank and now you look up and open them in a bank and you write it back up. So if I take this and I move this very, very slowly, I can increase the rate at which this moves. And now watch what happens when I stop.
It overcorrects.
That's right. It deflected the opposite direction because it didn't detect the movement because it's so slow. So what ended up with her is she banked over, not realizing it was there, went back to straight, and ended up going back over because now she's listening to what her body's saying and not looking at what the instruments are saying.
Well, I'll tell you, I got into a situation. I was doing a commercial flight in an airplane. This was a couple of years ago, and we were flying in IMC, so we're getting bounced around pretty good anyway in the clouds. We were straight and level, but my body kept telling me we were turning left, and I kept wanting to right correct. And I mean, it is very difficult, especially in the early years of instrument flying, to focus on your instruments and say, okay, I trust you. I don't trust this. Because you have this instinct to want to trust your own brain.
That's right.
But you can't. You have to trust the instruments.
Right. You got to understand your body will lie to you in flight.
Ugh.
If your cupula gets deflected in the semicircular canals in either the pitch roller yaw or all pitch roll and yaw, it sends this sensation that your body wants to respond to.
And this is why I have trust issues.
Because well, no, I don't think it's the cupola.
Let's talk about the leans for a second.
Okay.
Or you got one axis and it's being deflected. And it can lead to a bad situation. Normally, it's the most minor of the spatial disorientations. The one that we're about to talk about next is called the Coriolis Illusion. Well, the problem is we've got this same system on all three axes. So all we have to do is deflect one axis to another and then make a movement. So it's in aviation, all you have to do is you're flying along, all you have to do is reach over and pick that pin up off the floor. You just turned your head this way, make a turn with the airplane, and you just told your pitch axis, or you told one axis and deflected another. And then when you come back up, you can be completely discombobulated, if that's a word. You can be completely disoriented. And it gives you an overwhelming sensation of just twisting and turning, and you just don't know where you're at. We can simulate this so easily on the ground, but it really takes somebody that's willing to subject their body to some pain to do it.
Somebody.
Let's subject. I tell you what, we've got some footage where we subjected our friend Bryan Turner to what we're talking about. Let's take a look at that.
Fast, go, okay, 1, come on, faster, 2, come on, you can do this, Bryan, 3, one more time, you got 4, drop it, go. All right, that was good, you did good.
Hate you.
Now, in the minor league baseball games, they turn around 10 times. Is that necessary?
No, it doesn't take 10 times. I mean, it really only takes one time, but 10 times will definitely do it. But if you notice, they have the bat, they've moved their head down on the bat and then went around the bat. All they did was take one axis and subject that axis to movement when it's not expected. Of course, when they stand up and try to run, they're going to fall. It's going to be a disaster as far as that's concerned. They're going to fall down. And the same thing happens in flight because we have all three axes that we're able to manipulate. And if you move your head in one of those axes and then deflect movement, you're going to have this illusion.
Okay, so thank you, Bryan Turner, for volunteering to do that.
By the way, I will tell you, I've done this. I've given this class on several times, and I've never had anybody be willing to do that in front of the crowd. So, Bryan, I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Bryan Turner. So,
I
yes.
was willing to take one for the team.
Exactly.
Yeah. You have another demonstration where you have the student in the chair and with his thumbs showing, what's that demonstrating?
Yeah, so the idea behind it is the student's supposed to be able to turn their thumbs into the direction they're actually turning. So basically you can spin the chair, and as they begin to spin the chair, their cupola, it's like if I begin to turn this and just begin to turn, notice the cupola goes back to straight because the fluid's moving with it. All I have to do now is stop it.
And it's way off.
And it deflects. That's exactly right. So if somebody's sitting in a chair, they will have their thumbs, and they'll say, and you spin the chair, they'll deflect their thumbs to which way they're turning. And then as they continue the turn, they'll move their thumbs back up straight up and down.
I know what I'm doing later.
You can have bar tricks here. It works great.
That's amazing.
Right.
Okay, so obviously spatial disorientation was a factor during the Atlas crash.
Right. Yeah, the Atlas crash in Houston, that was definitely spatial disorientation. It was another type.
Let's talk about that type.
Okay, so you got two types. Basically, you have the somatogyral, which are gyral, meaning it's turning. You also can detect linear movement, forward, back, left, right, up, and down. So and the linear movement is detected by what's called the otolith organs. And otolith organs can detect this movement back and forth, left and right, up and down. So In that particular illusion, what ended up happening is the pilot basically did push the go-around mode and shoved the power lever forward inadvertently, and it accelerated. And so he perceived this acceleration as if he was pitching way up. So what did he do? Grabbed the controls, shoved it forward because he was listening to his body, not to his instruments. And he got enough mass of that airplane going in a downward movement without the other pilot pulling back on the controls. And there just simply was not enough time for them to come back up without hitting the earth first. So they hit, and of course, everybody perished and the airplane was destroyed. But it just goes to show spatial disorientation. It's not just a youthful pilot or a young pilot can be subjected to it. We're all subjected to it.
Like you had somebody that you knew, Ricky Leonard.
I had to say, Ricky lives in Shreveport, and it appears his crash of his jet prop. I knew him very well, super pilot, great guy, but he took off into an overcast, and made a turn and became disoriented. And it's very, very easy to, when you're not expecting, so when inadvertent IMC, and for him, he was planning to go into there, but wasn't prepared, it appears. But there's lots of other people that can fly airplanes that will fly into clouds inadvertently, not prepared to fly on the instruments, and very quickly get the airplane into an uncomfortable or a very dangerous position. And one that if you're not prepared nor trained, it can end in disaster.
As an instrument instructor, I've taken students in the clouds, and I had a student that I feel is a very proficient pilot that I took into the clouds, and he was not okay.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a laughable situation now.
I'm laughing because I know who the student is. That's all. I'm
Right.
not laughing because somebody got into trouble.
Right.
I'm laughing because I know the
it was a
student.
really great learning lesson because immediately, so we're in the clouds, and he just told me straight up, I need you to take the controls. He did the right thing. He
Yes.
said, I need you to take over. So I did, because we were, again, cumulus clouds getting bounced around, and they're giving us turns to line us up on the ILS. And he just, with the bouncing and the turning, I need you to take over. And I said, okay, my airplane, I have the flight controls. So I flew the airplane. As we popped out of the clouds, I asked him, would you like to continue? And he said, yes. We got on the ground, debriefed everything. And I said, okay, so talk to me. How are you feeling? He said, I know now how people die.
That's right.
It wasn't that he was scared necessarily. He just had the sudden realization. It's so different when you're flying under the foggles, right? Because you could take it off.
And the foggles, you catch a glimpse of something.
Exactly. It keeps your brain
your brain
right-sized.
Just a little glimpse of something will cue you into what's up and down. It'll cue you into your orientation. But when you're actually in the clouds, when you're hardcore IFR, you can't really tell up and down, left or right.
Absolutely.
There's nothing, and I will tell you, we fly lots of instrument training, lots of it. And when I have clients that come to me and we get a really low overcast and a 200 overcast and a half mile and little drizzly rain, I tell them you won the lottery because this is what you want to train in. Mm-hmm. And we go fly in the clouds a lot. But to me, somebody that's going for an instrument rating, somebody that's pursuing, you can't replicate being in the clouds. Being in the clouds is a very important part because you now understand that there's no way out. You have to basically turn off what your body's telling you and trust these instruments that are sitting in front
I
of you.
will typically take students who are a little further along in their training into the clouds. I don't do it immediately just because I need them to get some basic attitude instrument flying at least because I've got a couple of new guys that they just cannot.
When you say new to instrument or new to private pilot?
New to instrument.
Oh, see, in my private pilot training, my instructor, we had a day like that. And he went ahead and filed, and we took off, and he got vectors from ATC and let me fly in IMC. I loved it. It was eye-opening to me to be in IMC.
It depends on the student. If the student,
that's what I guess. It depends on the student. I loved it.
Yeah.
And
You can overwhelm a student with an experience like that. You can also have some people that thrive in that.
yeah,
scenario.
right. So I absolutely loved it.
Know your student.
Exactly.
Know your student.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about what spatial disorientation is on an aeromedical kind of basis. What can we do?
The number one thing you can do is realize it's a real threat. And the number one thing is trust your instruments. Our instruments in airplanes usually have backups. They have secondary sources, like some of them are electrically powered, some of them are vacuum powered, some of them are powered through different types of things. So if you have a failure of electrical, you have something else to help you. Have standby instruments inside your airplane. Know your airplane well, but trust your instruments unless you know there's a failure. Now, if you know there's a failure, you have to work around that. And we train that in the instrument rating to make sure that if you have a vacuum failure and you have vacuum instruments, you still need to be able to fly the airplane. But trust your instruments. There's very few times that you don't know that you have an instrument problem. It can happen, it does, but it's most of the time when you're spatially disoriented is because you're listening to what your body's telling you, what your vestibular system is telling you, and not trusting those instruments right in front of you. Can I tell you another thing?
Yeah.
Another thing that if you are flying in a dual cockpit aircraft, it's very rare that both pilots are going to experience the same spatial disorientation scenario.
Right.
So where we talked about transferring the flight controls earlier, that was brilliant. If you get into a spatial disorientation situation, transfer the controls to somebody that's not. And then the person that had the spatial disorientation event, focus on something that has a horizon. I'm a big fan of bigger instruments with bigger horizons. There's a lot of platforms, avionics platforms that are out there that have bigger screens, and those are great because they give you a visual representation of the horizon that's really big. And your visual system is very linked to your vestibular system, and your brain will write that image back up for you if you have something good to look at. So
One of the Kingers that I fly has a G1000 in it. It's big.
huge.
And I've got one right in front of me. I've never gotten the Leans flying an IMC in that thing.
Right. It is because your vestibular system and your visual system are very, very closely linked to each other. And so when you have something big to look at, your body will right itself quicker. So I'm a big fan of big horizontal situation indicators in the airplane.
It's good to know.
But the key is if you're flying a dual cockpit aircraft, don't try to fight through it. Don't try to be the hero that just transfer the flight controls because the other pilot over there is probably doing just fine.
Yeah.
And then right yourself, and then you can transfer the controls back, and you've averted a situation.
Anything else that pilots can do to help fight spatial disorientation?
Be physiologically ready.
So fatigue.
Fatigue late in the day, bad diet, anything where
I'm in trouble.
anything where your body's not going to respond as well is going to affect you. For me, if I'm tired late in the day, anything of this nature, I'm just not going to perform at the rate which I can. Nighttime tends to reduce visual cues and expand the potential of spatial disorientation. Be very careful in night flying. Night flying, I love flying at night. I'm all for flying at night, but night flying brings specific hazards, and your body needs to be prepared for that. Yeah.
All right. Any last words on spatial disorientation?
I think one of the things that we need to key on in spatial disorientation doesn't leave a breadcrumb trail to the accident. It's very, very difficult for them to know what happened because there's no breadcrumb. There's no, this instrument failed or we can't see that what happened. There's a lot of times that spatial disorientation is probably a part of an accident scenario, but the NTSB can't say, here's exactly what happened. There are times where we can clearly tell, but it doesn't leave that breadcrumb trail. It's much, much, much more prevalent than we think.
Then the stats show.
Correct.
What are the stats on GA accidents?
GA accidents are much higher than Part 121, much higher than military. It's interesting, if you look at military accidents, especially if you look at dual cockpit aircraft, they're very rarely there. But there are some accidents that happen, particularly in the Army. And as an Army aviator,
Helicopters.
they're dual cockpit aircraft, but think about what spatial disorientation events they have. A lot of them are dealing with brownout situations or whiteout. You're down close to the ground and the pilot is coming in to hover and you're very near the ground and you can't see a thing in a brownout situation, or a whiteout would be where you're hovering in snow. And I'm talking about it happens in a split second, and the airplane and people's lives can be destroyed very quickly. So spatial disorientation tends to happen for different types of aircraft, more or less, but one of the biggest risk factors we have is single pilot IFR, which people in the general aviation world are doing a lot of. So one of the areas where there's less instrumentation, there's not as good autopilot sometimes. These are places where spatial disorientation can really reach up and bite you. I'm a huge fan. I tell you, we've had more technological advances in the last while. I mean, it's certainly increasing rapidly. But one of the things we're having that are really coming onto the market now are some really good autopilots, some really good displays that are ergonomically correct, that are helping in the spatial disorientation arena. But never think to yourself, well, these instruments will save me as far as keep me from that situation. You still need to be a good pilot. You still need to be able to recover from that negative spatial disorientation event. But we're getting better and better and better all the time. I'm really excited to see somebody that spends the money to upgrade their aircraft to something that really is going to help to defend them against spatial disorientation.
That's a really good information.
All right, Joe, if people want to find out more about you, where do they go?
Flycasey.com. My last name's Joe Casey, so flycasey.com is a great place to see what we're doing, and I appreciate that.
Well, Joe, you're a regular here on InTheHangar. I know that we've had fans, always wanting to see more Joe Casey, so I really appreciate you coming out.
Well, y'all do such a great job. Your production's fantastic. Your information is great. So I just appreciate what y'all are doing for our aviation community.
Well, thank you. All right, you guys, thank you for watching. Remember, we're sponsored by Gold Seal and iFly GPS. We also are sponsored by Flying Eyes. We love our Flying Eyes. Christy and I were customers long before we even became sponsors. So we appreciate all you guys supporting the channel, and we'll see you next time in the hangar.